Welcome to the Monday, February 8th Education Committee and Supplementary Regular Board Meeting. I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland. My apologies. We will start with audience recognition on agenda items only. Is there anyone who feels so moved to speak this evening? Seeing none, now I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. We have two programs that we'd like to share with you tonight, the Extended Day Kindergarten Program and also an update on a really positive report we got from the Pennsylvania Department of Education on our Special Services Unit. But first up, Mr. Klein, Extended Day Kindergarten.
Good evening. This is a little bit more concise presentation on the work that we did at the Curriculum Committee of the Board last week. It's an overview of the Extended Day Kindergarten Program, a program that Lower Merion has implemented to look for some of the students that are in the kindergarten program that could use some extra help and to actually bring them to school for a full day to allow for repetition in a small group setting. The Extended Kindergarten Program began in the 13-14 school year. It is, as I said, designed for a small, intensive work with a small group of students. We're beginning that program next week with in-service going on this week with our new teachers, and we plan to run it until the end of June. To begin with the end in mind, the Extended Kindergarten Program is an effective intervention. I think it's actually a really wonderful thing, one of the bright spots in Lower Merion that I've seen. It's the opportunity to look for those students who could use a little bit of extra help and time and to give them that support in their home school with the opportunity for them to stay in the school with teachers and to have the advantage of the reading specialists, math specialists, and other folks who are working with them during the kindergarten program. With that said, the data is somewhat disparate. It's not exactly straightforward. Most data doesn't come exactly that way, but you can see some of the trends that actually show that there's been growth for some of the kids, and other kids we need to continue to look. So at any point in time in the data search for the 13-14 cohort, which is the one that I looked at, it will show some really great gains over the kindergarten year, but not necessarily those gains extending themselves into second grade. Some did, some didn't. But over that course of time, you had achievement team interventions for students that might have disabilities with evaluations that actually identified some of those children in need of learning support. And that extra EDK intervention gave you more interventions to look at to make that determination as to whether that student needed to go on to further evaluation. David asked an interesting question last time, so I'm just going to say among some of the factors he talked about, I did have a chance to pull out the age variable, and I will tell you that I was surprised at the answer. I really thought that I was going to tell you that age is a factor, that the younger the student that enters kindergarten, the more likely they are to be identified for the extended day kindergarten based on objective data, benchmark data. That isn't the case. It actually is a even distribution almost of thirds, younger, middle age, the middle age group and the older group. Middle age is probably not the right way to characterize that. We don't have any middle-aged kindergartners that I know of. So just as a quick overview of the program, this program, as I said, begins next Tuesday after the Monday holiday. That it will have a reading, math, and speech and language basis. Students will have individualized as well as small group instruction. They'll have support, and the EDK teacher will be in communication with the parents along with the kindergarten teacher. Just a model day for a PM group. We can have either an AM session or a PM session depending on where the cluster of needs goes. Marion and Kinwood will have morning sessions. The rest of the elementary schools will have extended kindergarten session in the afternoon. This is what a model day looks like. The extended day kindergarten teacher will pick the kids up from the kindergarten classroom, monitor them through lunch and recess, bring them into the classroom for the extended day, and stay with them until dismissal. We recognize this is a long day for 5-year-olds, and so a lot of movement and other kinds of activities are built into this day to make sure the kids aren't just sitting there looking at a computer or working one-on-one with teachers. So that's one of the challenges and one of the things we talk a lot to the extended day kindergarten staff about how to keep kids moving. The 13-14 snapshot of data just gives you some sense of the progress we've done. We had 40 initial students identified. This year we have closer to 50 in terms of the identification process, but we're still whittling a couple of those folks away in terms of parent permission. 29 of the 40 students began at a basic or below basic level, scored proficient or advanced on the kindergarten benchmarks at the end of the school year. So that was pretty good progress for the students we have there, and I have a graphic to show you. Of the 40 that started our kindergarten, our extended day kindergarten in 13-14, 31 still are with us into second grade, so we're able to look at a more longitudinal sense of data also. Just in terms of some demographics, this is the array of kids that are still in the second grade in terms of ethnicity, so you can see the array there. This is, in answer to the question, the cohort in terms of age, relatively equally distributed among those 3 age categories. So age is not, against what I would have thought intuitively, age is not a factor in terms of our, at least our initial identification in 13-14. This tells you a little bit about the kids that, that scored at the end of the kindergarten benchmark. Again, the majority of those, but for 2, were either basic or below basic. You can see that more than half of them made gains that brought them to advanced or proficient. This table will give you even a better array of that. You can see that 9 students jumped from basic to advanced, and you can look at your way down. Only 5 of those initial 40, the initial 40 stayed at the same level, below basic or basic. For the students that came, that are still with us in the 15-16 data, the gains didn't necessarily all stay in place. And so that is something that we want to look at and continue to explore. We still have a set of students who started in kindergarten below basic and basic who stayed at advanced and proficient levels, but we lost some ground for some of those students. It is important to note that of those 16 students that are still in the basic or below basic category, half of those students have been identified as in need of some degree of learning support. And so they do have IEPs and are working in either cooperative settings or in resource rooms to work on reading or math skills. So the extended kindergarten program is a bit of a precursor in terms of the actual interventions and conversation about students who may need extra support as they move into first and second grade. And these folks will tell you the earlier you get that support to them, the better chances you have that those kids will make gains, significant gains across the K-12 spectrum. Again, just looking at the array for 15-16, we start with a kindergarten score and then go to an end of kindergarten score and then go to the second grade score. You can see how they all play out. You can see some kids actually did advance. We had one kid that went from basic at the end of kindergarten to advanced in second grade, but we also saw some of those gains extinguish. So the 3 kids went from advanced to below basic. Those are kids that we needed to spend a little bit more time on. And I do believe that all 3 of those students actually have become students who have some support in their school program. So what have we learned about extended day kindergarten? Again, I would tell you a very unique and interesting intervention in Lower Merion, worth continuing study. Because it came in play in the 13-14 in a relatively short time frame, there has been a continued need to extend the program to understand it and make a more deliberate program, curriculum, so to speak. So Lorraine DeRosa, Nancy Mesa, Nancy have been working on the math and language arts process. I'm so embarrassed because I just always keep tripping over that last name. But it does require us to spend more time looking at the interventions that are in play, the diagnostic work that we're doing, and the individualization that we want to do that. With a small group of kids, it is purposeful and possible to do these small interventions with kids to make some gains. This year, we are trying to put a dedicated reading specialist part-time with this program, because when we put the reading specialist who has already got an overwhelming caseload at the elementary school on top of the extended day kindergarten program, it further dilutes the opportunity he or she has to work in the classroom. So we are trying to find some reading specialists who can work with us part-time to work with these kids too, and to help the extended day kindergarten teacher be more diagnostic and directed in the instruction. The one thing I had mentioned is CCLB, and we're just still trying to figure out whether there is a large enough group of kids to make that effort, is that when you specifically decide on an extended day kindergarten program placement, so let's take Marion, who is putting their extended day kindergarten in the morning. There are 2 or 3 kids who would be identified as in need, who are in morning kindergarten, who by nature of the placement of that program can take advantage of the extended day kindergarten program. Across the 6 elementary schools, once we get confirmation of where those students are, there may be an opportunity to see if there is a way to cluster the remaining kids and put them into another program. I know our elementary principals try very hard to work with the parents to even flip the programs, so that if it's a morning kindergarten student, they may go to the parent and say, to take advantage of this program, we're going to ask you to switch to the afternoon. Some parents are okay with that, some aren't, because of just the logistics of their schedule. But we're working on that, and once we get a chance to see that array after everyone has made the decision to change or not to change and what's left over, we'll see if there is the opportunity to actually form a final 7th cohort perhaps and put them into another school, or to bring them over here to find a place where we could actually work with them. That's the overview. What questions can I answer for you?
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Just quickly, I had a clarifying question. The kindergarten benchmarks, and this may have been covered at CCLB, how are those developed, and what exactly are we looking for, I guess high level in terms of the kindergarten benchmarks?
Sure, but for both math and reading language arts, those are benchmarks that are developed by our internal staff. Lorraine would run the reading, Nancy would run the math. They're based on the curriculum that has been covered. They've been formed by teachers. They've been internally validated, and then they are administered to the kids. And then we look at them in any given year to look at both validity and reliability. But they're basically the same benchmark that we've been using for a number of years to determine placement and progress in the kindergarten program. They're administered 3 times, the beginning of the school year, at a midpoint, which we've just finished, and then at the end of the school year.
And the assessment anchors, I'm assuming, come from PA Core, and so we're using what the state says kindergartners should end up with in terms of skill set?
I would have to, Deb, unless you know, I would have to defer to the folks that build that. I would assume yes, but I don't know that exactly. Since our program is aligned to PA Core, I would expect that our assessments are aligned at a baseline level, at a minimum level to the PA Core.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions? Dr. O'Leary, please.
You talked a little bit about kids who might be in the inconvenient AM or PM session. Are there any other capacity issues? Are you finding that you have too few kids, too many kids, or kids in the wrong locations for convenience? Or
Logistics creates a little bit of an issue for this, so that in any given, for any of our 6 elementary schools, filling to capacity is not a problem. 6 to 8 kids across 3, 4, 5 kindergarten sessions is not hard to do. What becomes a little bit of a capacity issue is if you're a kindergarten session, you're trying to move a student there and you're already locked because of numbers, that becomes a logistic issue. And we are seeing that in a couple of our schools, particularly over at Penn Wynn, where it would be nice to move a kid to the morning session, but there may not be room in that session because we've exceeded the capacity, the board guidelines for that. That would be the major logistic issue we're looking at right now.
Question, please.
Thanks. I have a couple questions. This will now be the 3rd year of this program, right?
Correct, yes.
So in year one, we definitely had a number of kids who did not fall in the right morning or afternoon, and as well as kids who were offered the opportunity, or families who were offered the opportunity and didn't take it. So we should have at least a reasonable number of kids each year who would have qualified for the program but did not participate in the program.
Correct.
So do we have any sense of how those students did compared to the kids who did participate in the program?
Yeah, for the four, I'm sorry, that was, yes, for the first year, the 13-14, we had 4 students among the 6 schools, so that's a pretty small number, who were offered the program and declined for some reason, mostly parental decision, not logistics. Of those 4 students, they were below basic when they finished kindergarten. They remained below basic in 2nd grade. That's a small sample size, so it's hard to make that connection between progress. And I want to caution you that some kids with benign neglect would make progress just because developmentally from kindergarten to 3rd grade and 2nd grade, we see kids make amazing gains because of maturation. But I don't want to discount the amount of time and effort that we do into this program that does seem to make significant staying gains for our kids. So while that baseline from kindergarten to 2nd grade is not statistically significant with just the 4 kids, I think it does tell you at least a little bit of the story that those kids didn't make progress absent the EDK program.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have a natural control that, even if it's small, we ought to continue to follow that. Now, there were 4 kids, but does that include the kids who were in the wrong side of the?
Yeah, there were in that first year of the construction of the program, only 4 students that were initially recommended for the program there was not a way to machinate the program's K to the kindergarten AM and PM session to get them in.
Okay. And then it looks like by grade 2, I was looking at that grade 2 slide that you had up there, 15 of the students had dropped lower, 11 were higher, and 5 were no change. Did I do that math right?
Yes.
Oh,
15
the
of
advanced.
There were 15 students that went back into the below basic and basic category. They didn't all fall into that category. Some of them, like the students, went from basic to below basic. They were already identified in the other pie chart as being still below the proficient category. But we didn't see the gains stay in place like you would have hoped, or you would have seen even greater gains. You saw a couple of those kids go from, like you saw, advanced or proficient into the basic or below basic based on the 2nd grade beginning of the year benchmark. I did ask to see the middle of the year benchmark just to see if maybe it was just a lapse in summer and they made those gains back, and that indeed was not the case. That those scores stayed relatively stable, although I haven't seen the entire 2nd grade. They were still coming in as this program was put together. But I would have hoped to have seen maybe a big change in that, and they didn't.
So that's about half. So, I hope we're asking the question, why, and is there something else going on here? I mean, it begs a lot of questions.
Well, of those 15, I don't have a definite answer, but of those 15, more than almost 3/4 of them have either been identified as students in need of learning support or are in the achievement team process right now, where that progress stay that you're seeing there has suggested to teachers and the achievement team that there may be more to this than just a developmental lag in the student's score.
So next year, when we review this program, it'd be interesting to see, 3rd column, how many of the students in each of those columns is then later identified.
Yeah, I was hesitant to put that on a single slide. I'd rather tell you about it. But
Yeah.
I understand exactly what you're saying. And it is, again, I've said to these folks, I think it's a testimony to the process that it takes you a year or 2 of collected data and slow, deliberate conversation before you jump immediately into this achievement team identification process.
Right.
That's really a good reflection on our teachers in our schools.
So I guess really the point there is just that we're asking those questions and that we're following
Right.
up with them.
And next year, you'll be able to put an overlay of PSSA data on this at some point in time, probably 2 years, since they'll take the third grade data, and that'll be available only in fourth grade.
I just wanted to follow up because we talked about this for a long time at the last curriculum meeting. And I think it was one of the things that you mentioned, which I think is important in this context because the data is relatively small, well, it's not relatively, it is very small numbers, and we don't have a long time, was the fact that the teachers, that the kindergarten teachers, not the teachers who were in the teaching the program, but the teachers in the other part of the program felt that there was significant improvements in the kids who were in the extended. Yeah, so I think that's important, and I agree, obviously, with
In
Diana.
that first year, you make significant gains. It
Yeah.
is remarkable to see the difference in the students from that mid-year part to the intervention to the end of the
In
year.
addition to what Diane is asking for, I think it would be interesting as well to know, are those, some of those students also in our summer programs? And I think.
Practically that's a great question, and practically every one of them was further recommended for the SPIES program that summer.
So it's going to be hard to pull apart what is actually,
That's the conundrum.
no, that's
in-
education. I
in-
mean, I
in,
know.
you know,
we
separating
don't-
out the
we don't
independent variables.
take kids out of
I-
supportive programs because we
I
want to see
think,
how they're doing.
I think what you said earlier, though, shouldn't be discounted. I mean, sometimes the anecdotal, observational data, the teachers, I know the kid, I've been working with the kid, they go to the program after, at the second part of the day, they're retaining or capturing some things that they weren't before. That has some, that qualitative data has some real place.
And I just have to say to you, against doing nothing, this is a tremendous intervention for students who seem to be at great risk in the middle of their kindergarten year. I will say, I don't have it on a slide, but David, you asked about preschool too. I would have expected also that the majority of our identified students would not have gone to preschool. I was wrong on that one too. Except for one elementary school, practically every student this year that was recommended, I couldn't pull the data reliably from 13-14, but in this year's cohort of students, about 50, almost all of them had some preschool experience.
Thanks for tracking that down for me.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
They were interesting. They were
yeah.
both counterintuitive for me.
Yeah, please.
Thanks. My last question just has to do with the cost of this program and the cost of the additions you're talking about, the added, I guess, the added special reading instruction. Do we have any numbers on?
No,
the
I can
program?
I can try to gather that from you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
It's less than you would think. No. But
I'm
happy.
expecting it not to be that
Yep.
big a number, but I'm just curious what it is.
To that point, I know in the past we used the accountability block grant, which was somewhere around, Mr. Orlando, $30,000 for, that's the number that I
$77,000 last year.
recall. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the gains and the importance of such a program, seems like a, relatively, small cost.
I hope this doesn't sound sarcastic, but somewhere in the next 3 years, you'll see that state funding come back, I'm sure. Maybe 4 or 5. Yeah, it's not there for us this year, but it's a relatively small chunk of state funding that was actually applied dollar for dollar to pay for this program last year.
Awesome. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Klein. Mr. Copeland?
Thank you, Mr. Klein, and the principals. I think it's been I'm really pleased we were able to start it earlier. So it's a relatively easy last name, Klein. That was supposed to. I couldn't have done it either. The second presentation we have is Kimberly Frazier. Kimberly is going to go over the special education compliance monitoring. And while she's setting up, while this is a state compliance monitoring and certainly compliance would suggest that it's sort of a low-level, just a bureaucratic situation. There are aspects of it that I think are really helpful, and I think they came in and they saw some good things in Lower Merion. So,
Great,
Fraser?
thank you. Good evening. I did invite the special education supervisors to be with us this evening too, because I think that as I shared at the curriculum committee meeting, the district performed exceptionally well on this round of the compliance monitoring. And that has a lot to do with our staff, and particularly has a lot to do with the supervision of our special education supervisors, the support that they provided as we were going through the process. As I'll summarize for you, it is a pretty extensive process with a lot of work that goes into, the compliance at the time, but then also leading up to it. So I did want to personally introduce each of them and also recognize them. I have a deep appreciation for their commitment and their diligence to our education of students with disabilities, and just want to take a moment to recognize them. We have with us Deb Libowicki, who is our lead supervisor of special education, and she is also supervising our early intervention process as well as grades K through 3. Melissa Sanapi Gibson is our special education supervisor for grades 10 to 12 plus, which includes our students with services until age 21. We have Beth Cavalier, who is our supervisor of grades 4 through 6, and Neil Evans, who is our interim supervisor for grades 7 through 9. So the same as Mr. Klein, I kind of condensed this down a little bit from the committee meeting. The Bureau of Special Education will come in and do an audit for school districts and charter schools every 6 years. And what they're really looking to do is to ensure that we're meeting compliance with all the federal and state special education regulations, which are quite extensive, and that we're continuing to improve the performance outcome of our students with disabilities. So what they will do is they train monitoring teams with a lead monitor assigned to the district through PDE, and they really apply the criteria based on these 3 primary sources of regulations. The first part of the process, while the on-site visit was the first week of November, we really began this process over the summer. We began the process in terms of starting to gather information, and the initial thing that we had to submit 30 days prior to the on-site visit is what is called a facilitated self-assessment. This is a 150-page report that is a comprehensive look at the policies, procedures, programs within the district. This chart is just representative of the 21 different areas that we were required to answer specific questions on, share data on with the state. So you can see it ranges anywhere from the graduation and dropout rates and our comparison with the state and steps we're taking in that regard, with assistive technology, the training that we're providing, and it does get to some level of specificity with this report, obviously the 158 pages, but that's the first part that then we submit to the state. We also had to, in that time frame, do what's called an educational benefit review. So we received from the state 10 randomly selected names. We were required then to pull the files for those students and do what's called the educational benefit review. And part of that is it's really the purpose is intended to look through the file. We look at the current IEP, we look at the prior 2 IEPs, and we really analyze whether the student's current program is really created to enable them to make meaningful progress, that they've really gained educational benefit from the program that we're providing. So through this process, again, there's very specific steps that we have to take. The supervisors worked with the case managers of the students that were selected to put that together, and then we provided that to PDA. So this was a good collaboration between supervisors, coordinators, and teachers. Then in November, the trained monitoring team came out for an on-site visit. And so part of this visit included a lot of different things. They did interviews with school district administrative team and instructional personnel. They reviewed the facilitated self-assessment and all the documents that accompanied that to justify their responses in there, looking at policies, our plans, our outcomes and performance data, and really looking closely at all of those specifics for the district. At the same time, then they also selected 10 additional randomly selected students, and they did comprehensive case studies on those files. So the trained monitoring team then reviewed closely those files. They did classroom observations of those students. They interviewed the parents, some students. They interviewed the general and special education teachers, and then again did that comprehensive file review. Through this whole process on the on-site visit, in addition to those 20 individual student files that I had mentioned, each facilitated self-assessment section had some files that they had to review as well. So I would estimate we had upwards of 80 to 100 student files that were pulled and reviewed in this process. So it's pretty comprehensive look at the district. Following that, we had a consultation. We didn't receive the written report until mid-January, so things are moving pretty quickly. We're getting this information out to you pretty efficiently. We had the report come to us about mid-January. 2 weeks ago, we were able to meet with Richard Moss, who is our PDE advisor, who reviewed the findings of that report. 2 areas of special commendation by PDE, which I think is really worth noting, is the district's involvement of parents and the training that we provide for personnel. Our one area of corrective action is the least restrictive environment. And so I put a little bit of information in this presentation to talk a little bit more about the least restrictive environment. I do want to point out that, we feel really good about our compliance measures that, in our performance on this. Through that entire process, there were 2,046 checkpoints that could have been noted as non-compliant. Of those 2,046 checkpoints, there were only 4 that were noted as errors. And so when you think about that number of checkpoints, natural human error, we're quite pleased with how well our teachers and staff have done in that regard. In terms of least restrictive environment, that's the one area that we need to continue to work on. This is also the same area that was a corrective action item in 2009. So what we need to do at this point then is, since that is the corrective action area, we need to, within 180 days, submit a written plan to PDE that addresses an action plan for how we intend to improve in this particular area. The least restrictive environment, and this is, the definition by IDEA, it's really talking about students having access to the general education curriculum with their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible. It's different for every student. It's very individualized. What we want to do is really maximize their exposure and their involvement in the general education curriculum, and again, with their non-disabled peers. We already, as a district, have been taking pretty active measures towards improving this particular area, and later on I'll show you, the data that supports that. But we really are already in a, moving forward in a positive way. Our IEP teams really do carefully look at all of the aspects of a student's programming to really ensure that we are including them in the least restrictive environment. We look at, instructional aspects, physical, social environment. All of those are taken into account and carefully calculated by the IEP teams. And the teams really do look at what are each individual student's strengths, what are their needs, what are their instructional levels, and how can we program for them in the least restrictive environment. We give full consideration to a variety of supplemental aids and services, and again, that might be merely a manipulation of the physical environment all the way to assistive technology, instructional strategies, etc. The teams really do also make deliberate efforts to fade those accommodations as appropriate as you're moving students towards transition. We do have a good continuum of services within our district schools. We are able to program for a high percentage of students right in their home schools through our programming. Another thing that we've done that supports the least restrictive environment is we have gone through intensive training with all of our special education teachers on standard aligned IEPs. So the IEP goals are aligned to state standards so that our teams always have their eye on where a student is performing in relation to those state standards. So we never take our eye off that. So we're continuing to move towards that. And again, increasing the performance of our students. The professional learning that we've provided for our staff, and most recently including some professional learning on autism for our entire elementary school teams. There are 2 half-day sessions this year that are focused purely on autism and autism support. And so moving forward, doing the same thing in terms of behavioral supports. The professional learning that's provided through our PLC models, our special education teachers, our special education teams are really an integral part of those PLCs at the secondary level, and really an integral part of those teams, and that ongoing learning and dialogue is critically important. The other aspect that really helps with least restrictive is a higher level of support through our district administrative team. With the restructure and the supervisor's able to stay involved with the family, stay involved with the student when they're transitioning in and out of the district, does allow for a higher level of support and a higher success rate. So I lead that all up to, we really already have taken some great measures. For our compliance this year, the state was looking at the numbers from 12-13. As you can see, since that time, we've already trending downwards in terms of our placement of students. And we are very close to meeting what that target is for what the state is looking for. So we feel really good about this in terms of our action plan. We feel good about our ability to meet that target as we're moving forward. So as my team and I, talked about the results of the monitoring and the audit, honestly, we walk away with a sense of we should have done well. Here, we expect that we would do exceptionally well on that. But we always look at every opportunity we have to say, well, how can we become better? And there's so much more to it than just saying, well, we did really well, and that's all that we we need to worry about. So we really have been looking at some of the different aspects of the compliance monitoring that we can glean some information about how we can continue to improve, always looking to do a better job. Through the interviews with parents, there were the personal interviews with the 10 students that were polled for the comprehensive file reviews, but there was also an online survey that was provided, and 137 families responded to that particular survey. And we got a lot of good feedback. We got feedback that parents felt like they were meaningful participants in the team process. They felt like their children were getting a good education here in Lower Merion, and that the supports and services were being provided appropriately. The one thing that stood out for me in terms of a feedback for us to reflect on is parents' overall desire for some more training and looking at doing some additional parent training. And so that was good reflection for us as we move forward to think about what other ways we can provide training for our parents. The reflections on the feedback through the staff interviews. So through the process, there were general education students interviewed as well as special education teachers. And through that, again, a lot of positives in terms of the supports that are provided to the teachers. the feedback that we received about what they would like to see more, they would like to see more time to collaborate with special education teachers, really having that time to work together and plan for individual students, for individual classes. That came through again and again, the precious value of time to be able to collaborate. That is an important piece of it. And as we continue to look at how we're using co-teaching and using our special education teachers in the general education setting, it's a good reflection for us. And then the other part too is reflections for our team, just about how we can provide some clear guidance, K to 12, for our teachers. We're moving forward to a full Professional Learning Day on March 4th, where we'll have the entire special education department together. So we'll be able to review these findings, talk with them about things that we know as a department that we can improve upon as we're moving forward. And so really, looking forward to being able to do that. The other part for our administrative team is also collaborating with our families, getting this information out, sharing with our families, and really working collaboratively, particularly in that area of parent training. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier. Let me open it up for questions at this time. Mr. Driscoll?
Thank you very much. I have a question about the least restrictive environment. I guess I'm trying to get a sense of how much we missed what they were looking for, and I'm trying to get a sense of, if I understood your presentation correctly, they really went in depth on 10 student files, is that?
They did, it goes in depth. They did 10 student files for the educational benefit review. That is an in-depth look. Our teams put together that information, but they reviewed it again when they were on site. And then there's 10 additional students where they do a comprehensive review of those files. So it's 20 that get a more comprehensive view. And then for other aspects of the facilitated self-assessment, like assistive technology, they would have pulled a sampling of students who receive assistive technology to review how we're integrating that into the IEPs.
So I guess I'm questioning did they pull a large enough sample of our students to get a sense of really where we are lacking in their estimation in the least restrictive environment? That's what maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
No, the least restrictive environment that that is referred to here is really looking at the number of students who are placed out of district. And so what they do is they look at the state average and do a comparison based on that. We are 0.3% off.
Do you have a sense on, so it's just based on an average?
It is, correct.
So if the state average, the other 500 some odd school districts move up or down, that could make us better or worse?
It could over a given time, correct. And the other part to consider is, so we talk about this, and again, I'll go back to the statement, least restrictive environment is very individualized. So we wouldn't sacrifice a student's program or what was best for a student to meet a percent. We would always, our IEP teams are encouraged to do right by each of our individual students.
Dr. O'Leary?
You mentioned that the staff was doing autism training for 2 half-days, but I think you said it was K to 5?
It is,
that-
elementary.
Is that going to be extended to the other grades also?
We hope so.
Or have they already, okay, but it's
Yeah.
not planned yet?
Not for this year, no.
Okay, and then your last point was that you're going to get the information out to the parents, and can you just talk a little bit more about what they might expect to see?
Sure, absolutely. So this is all happening really quickly. Again, we're just a couple of weeks off of our follow-up interview with Mr. Moss. So what I intend to do is pull together the leadership team of CSE, share this information with them, talk about how we can get the information out, and talk about specifically how we can address some of those aspects. Again, the parent training piece is really critical. I heard that loud and clearly through the survey results that we received. So we'll share the information that way, collaboratively.
Please.
This is a little bit of a follow-up from that, but also just congratulations to you and the team, because this is really good news. And I do think it's notable that parental involvement is kind of noted as something that we excel at. And in terms of communicating this out, I'm wondering, is the actual report something that we would want to, is that appropriate? I'm sure it's available to the public, but is this something we'd want to share a link to or through our board newsletter? And yeah, I
I
just
think
want
what would be, might be more meaningful would be more of a summary of that. Even the report that was returned to us, like, is our summary report. So you saw our facilitated self-assessment's 158 pages. The report from the state, I don't know the number of pages, it's at least 75 pages. So to me, that wouldn't be meaningful, but
Right.
certainly a summary of the information, the highlights,
Right.
in more of a narrative format. We could
Okay, I
definitely.
just think given, especially since your arrival and kind of the reorganization of the department, this is a really nice affirmation of the progress and all the work that's been done. So congrats again.
Thank you.
Please.
Thanks. A couple questions about this least restrictive environment. In response to Ben's question, you said that it mostly had to do with the number of out-of-district placements.
That's what it has to do with, yes.
So when I heard that was cited as maybe an area of weakness, all kinds of bells and whistles went off in my head. If it's just a matter of whether we're complying to an arbitrary percentage of students placed out of district or not, that's a completely different response from how I feel about hearing that. So, are you saying there was not much mention of least restrictive environment concerns other than the fact that we have a higher percentage of students placed out of district?
That's correct.
Okay, so in your summary, I would emphasize that that's what it means, because that, I mean, I'm thinking completely different thing when that came up.
No, and we actually, the majority of our students in our district schools are included at a very high level.
Yeah, that was my
impression.
impression, so that's why that was a point of concern for me. And this is actually the second time I've heard this presentation, and if it weren't for Ben's question, I wouldn't have realized that was the distinction. And do you have a sense of how many of our out-of-district placements were parent-initiated and how many of them were district-initiated?
Honestly, I do not. What I can say is that all of those placements are IEP team decisions. So it's in collaboration between the school-based team and the family. So that's always a collaborative process.
Right.
So that's a family and their school-based team really coming to that decision that there's a higher level of need than we can provide.
No, I understand that, but I mean, we have a lot of people who claim that the reason they moved into the district is because of the quality of our special education services. And I was just curious if you had any sense, because, some parents come into the district expecting that they're going to get some, out-of-placement position that they wanted. So I was just wondering if you had any data on that at all.
What I can say is that those placement decisions are always supported by data, that the teams always do look at, have we done everything we possibly can within our schools to address the needs of this student before we look out. So whether the genesis is a parental concern or a team concern, the process is still the same, that we're really looking at the data to support that, really ensuring that all interventions have been put into place, do reevaluations before students are moved to an out-of-district placement. So all of that's really taken into account, whether it's a parent-initiated or a district team.
Yeah, thanks. You guys are doing a great job. On the out-of-district placements, is there any, there are about 60 or so, I forget the exact number. Is there any trend in terms of the grades when they're out of district? Is it the older children, the younger children, or just a random
It really
assuming?
just depends on the individual needs of the student. You will see, in terms of trends, we can talk about, when you start to get to the secondary level, when there are students that's when you might see some more significant mental health needs. So we do see some additional placements at the secondary level for students requiring emotional support. That tends to be more prevalent at the secondary level. But in terms of number, elementary, middle, high, in terms of number of percent out, there's not. It really is individualized and can change in any given year and within a given year.
And once a child is out of the district, do they usually remain out, or do they come back?
It's really, again, it's very individualized. Our hope is always that our students will be able to return back to our in-district programs if it's appropriate.
Right.
One of the benefits of the new structure of the special education supervision model is that our supervisors stay with those students whether they're in or out of district, and part of that is the philosophy that we really do want our students to be able to have the ability to transition back when their strengths and needs can be addressed within our buildings.
And that's
we really do
on-
value that.
Yeah. That's evaluated on a yearly basis for each child?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a minimum of an annual meeting for each student, but our supervisors are in constant communication with our out-of-district programs to monitor progress and ensure that it's the appropriate placement. And we have had students very successfully transition back.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Ms. Frazier and
Thank you very
team.
much.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So at this time, I will take public comment on agenda or non-agenda items. If you're interested in speaking, please sign in with Mr. Orlando. There's a 3-minute time limit. If you could let us know your name and where you reside in the district.
Good evening. My name is Ruth Jenkin. I live at 354 Worcester Road. Many of you remember that about 5 years ago, I was harassing the previous superintendent for early education intervention, and a pilot program was established 3 years ago. And I'm thrilled to see that it is starting to prove to be valuable. One of the things that I feel significant that needs to be taken into consideration is the cost of summer school. Once again, summer school was brought up again, and for many students, if there is a cost factor, it may prevent them from participating. The other concept that I keep bringing up, which I will continue to, is a kindergarten center. Where we can now house all of the kindergarten students and have much more fluidity in terms of moving them from half day to full day to setting up groups that may be more harmonious. That I think, and that will also, as I've mentioned before, open up classrooms, seats for students as our population increases. Without continuous construction. There has been so much construction on all of the schools. Some of my children and grandchildren have only lived with construction. Every school they go to, when they go to Penn Wynne, it has construction. When they go to middle school, there's construction. When they come to the high school, there's construction. It's like it's part of Lower Merion's process on everything, and I think that you have to look for some other alternatives. I think volunteers may be needed in some of these classrooms where we can get parent volunteers. And also, as far as the special ed students and the moving them into more mainstream situations, I think that it benefits the special ed students as well as the special ed students. One more thing, going back to the kindergarten, I think very valuably, you are now able to identify very early on some of the students that may need more special education, and letting them just kind of ride through for a while until, too much damage is done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, Dr. Van Lynch, I can respond. First, Mrs. Jenkins, thank you very much for your comments and for harassing the prior superintendent. Congratulations for getting it. Yeah, I had that feeling, but I just thought I'd... As you may know, the cost of summer school is supplemented by the district for students who have needs in terms of free and reduced lunch. In terms of the kindergarten center, we did spend quite a bit of time discussing it, I think at a facilities meeting. Mr. Orlando is saying yes. There are some operational issues with that. The board's looking at it. No final decision has been made. And I, for one, like your idea of volunteers. I think I think we can make real use of some of the resources in the community.
Thank you for coming out tonight. With that, we're adjourned.